You don't need the screen to do what we're going to do. Everybody should have received a handout that kind of has the website on it. We're going to work off that website, off this handout. And I'm just going to stay in the middle so I can kind of, everybody can hear me. And we're going to go through the irrigation program the way you would make decisions on how much water to apply based on this printout sheet. Now keep in mind that this is last year's and that we have all the information on it from a whole year. And for 2014, if you were logging on, it would only show you each day because it calculates the ET on a daily basis. So you have the ability to look at a whole year, where when you're logging on in the summer, you'll get one day at a time. Everybody follow me on that?
There's cumulative every day plus the days previous.
It accumulates.
While Bob's pulling that up, so let's say today's May the 10th, and you planted cotton on May 1st. It's not going to give you May 10th information, weather information, until after midnight on May the 11th. So you're basically 24 hours behind. If you want to go in and look at what's going on today, you're not going to get it on this website. You can on the weather component, but it's not going to be downloaded to your sheet. It's 24 hours behind.
Yeah, I'm going to show you all a quick video. We talked about water efficiency and the use of LIPA systems and versus broadcast spray. Remember in the first session I told you that what we're going to tell you today only works under a set strict area parameters. And if you're broadcast spraying, your system is inefficient. And a lot of these numbers that we're telling you to use are not going to work as well because your system is inefficient with a broadcast spray. You're only about 50% efficiency. So if you're putting on an inch, you're only getting a half an inch. And so you'd essentially have to double your water, or at least increase it by 40 or 50% to equal LIPA. And so everybody needs to understand that that is. We're going to just watch this thing through. This is a kind of a diagram of how soil moisture works in the soil. It was generated with capacitance probes, and colors were assigned to these numbers. And it shows the wetting and the drying. The blue is very, very wet. Yellow is starting to dry. Red is dry. Whenever you have a full profile like that and you irrigate on top of it, all you're doing is pushing water out of the bottom of the soil profile and you're pushing all your nutrients with it. Okay. So we're right here at a really key pivotal point. We know we have the profile filled and it's prior to bloom. Okay. We've achieved this objective right here. We're set up to draw moisture out of the profile, and we're going to supplement it during the season. If everybody could put on 1.5 inches or 2 inches, every 5 days, you really wouldn't have to worry about filling this profile. This is just money in the bank is what it is. Now, this is an example, I think it was 60 or 65%, I can't remember. But this is just an example of irrigating at 65%. So what Glenn can do is he can put on about 1.5 inches every week. Okay, so we use that number to know that our capacity is at about 60–65% of ET. If you could only irrigate at about 1 inch a week, your percentage of ET would be around 55%, 50%. The way you determine that, a rough way to determine it, is you take the peak demand of cotton when it's in the at the time when it's using the most water, which would be about 0.32, just as a general number. It's not going to be the same every year. You take 0.32 and multiply it times 7, which would be 2.1 inches. Okay, that would be, if you could, it'd be 100%. If you can put on 1 inch a week, take 1 inch and divide it by 2.1, and that's going to be your potential that irrigated, what percentage of evapotranspiration. Does everybody follow that? So we're using 60%. So you see that here on this sheet there's a line that's drawn across there from 7/7/17. That is the point where we're gonna start calculating PET and start making irrigation decisions based on the PET information, okay? That's our start point, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start taking this daily ET numbers, we're gonna start adding them up, okay? So on 7/18, we got 0.06. If anybody's got a calculator, add 0.06. 0.09, that's going to be a total of 0.15. You add the next day, 0.1, that's going to be 0.29. Then the next day is 0.12. We're not irrigating, we haven't got to the point where we're ready to irrigate. And so, anyway, we finally walk along here, and on the 24th, we get a rain. Does everybody see that, 0.6? I didn't count 0.6. I didn't count it at all into the equation, okay? Then we go to 0.09, 0.13, 0.12. You're adding these numbers up, okay? And when you get down to, he's going to decide to irrigate on 7/30, okay? He's added up the numbers, and he's getting close to the point where he's reaching the need to put on irrigation. He can put on about 1.5 inches is what his limit is. And so on the 7/30, he's going to irrigate. You don't have the numbers for 7:30 yet because it's 8 o'clock in the morning is when he's deciding. And this goes to Eddie's question, what do you count? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the numbers from 7/29 the day before, and we're going to count them for 7/30. Okay, we may be off a few tenths, it doesn't matter, okay? And so what this adds up to is 1.53 that we need to apply at that particular irrigation. If you add the numbers, all these numbers, it comes to 1.78. Multiply 1.78 times 6.
You switched from 1 to 75.
Pardon?
Why did you switch on effective rain from 1 to 75?
We just made the decision that is about what our capacity for soil penetration capacity was. 3/4.
We actually made that switch when we got to 4.85 inches.
Yeah.
Because we didn't think we captured all 4.85 inches, so we switched it at that rain event.
Okay.
And that's, as Bob mentioned, that's the flexibility that you've got. You can
Dr. Krieg, what is the
look at
What is
each
it
rainfall
considered
event and adjust
Palm
it.
and clays? What's the infiltration capacity?
Just a little over 2/10 inch per hour.
0.2 of an inch per hour.
But that July rain was real slow.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was in our area. It fell about as gentle as you could get it.
Yeah. And when we got that rain, we turned the water off, and we said the profile's full. Okay. So now we're going to start counting on PET.
When you go back and look at those probes during that period of time, you know, the water was moving. When you add up all that went into that soil and it went below the root zone with all of that rain, we were getting probably 80% of the rain with that particular rain. Now the May and June rains are the ones that are real high intensity, the thunderstorm type rains, where you get a rain intensity that's, you know, a couple of inches per hour with some of these thunderstorms, and that's going to run off, or at least a bunch of that is on clay soil.
Some of this is judgment call.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you say, okay, if you counted at 80% and I counted at 70, how much are we different? Not very much. At least you're trying to count water, is what it boils down to.
That's not 1 point.
All these calculations you're doing, you're having to do manually because the program doesn't take.
Because I'm counting it at 100%, okay? So we're gonna do another example. We're gonna go from 7:31. We irrigated on 7:30, but we counted 7:30, okay?
So you started irrigation on 7:30.
We started irrigation on 7:30, okay? So I drew a line between 7:30 and 7:31. That's the next irrigation cycle. So we're actually still irrigating, you know, on 7:31, 7:32, and 7:33. We didn't finish on 7:30, we just started on 7:30. Is everybody following that? Okay. So 7:31, we're going to start over. and we have 0.15, 0.15, someone could run those numbers for me. 0.22, 0.22, 0.20. See we're getting into bloom, and see how we're starting to get into the higher water use rates. You know, you've got a copy of this chart. I like to know what the 100% ET is, because I know that around first square we're going to be a little bit over 0.1, right into peak bloom, and a little past that we're going to be up to 0.32, and it's going to drop down. The point is now you're thinking about how much the crop is using, and you're trying to match that with how you can irrigate it, okay? So we added up, we got to 8.6, and we're going to irrigate on 8.6, and so we went 0.15, 0.15, 0.22, 0.22, 0.2, 0.22, and what does that come to? And then we're going to add 0.22 again for 8.6, because we don't know what the PET is for 8.6, okay? Because that's the day we're making a decision. 1.4. So multiply 1.4 times 60%. Anyway, we come up with a roughly 1.3 inches total at 100%, multiply times 60%. And it comes to 1.035 inches. Everybody following that? We're not irrigating at 100%, we're irrigating at 60%. Okay? So where's it going to get the extra water? It's going to get the extra water out of here, okay, out of your profile. So the PET said we needed 1.3 times 60%. We're going to put on 1.0. It actually comes out to 1.035. Then we're going to start another cycle, and on 8.7, start running the numbers again. And you notice he's staying on a 7-day irrigation cycle. Okay, we had a kind of a rule of thumb that says we want to put on no less than an inch and no more than an inch and a half. Less than an inch, and that's going to be during peak demand. We're going to actually put on less than an inch as the cotton demand's less. But that's going to be during peak demand. And that has to do with the infiltration rate of the soil. Less than an inch, you really start, you know, degrading the value of the irrigation. I don't know how much it is, but you put, you know, 0.6 of an inch on LIPA, and it kind of is the same thing as, you know, putting on a broadcast spray. You know, you're really getting into pretty high evaporation rates because you're not pushing the water very deep into the soil profile. And so that's why we say between an inch and an inch and a half. Over an inch and a half, you start pushing water so far ahead of your pivot that you're not getting infiltration.
Are there any really effective ways to increase that penetration? I mean, to make that soil where it's going to pull more in, or is it just going to be a function of soil type?
I guess you could interfer a rip, you know, you do that. You know, that would be, you know, when you're concentrating all that water into one furrow, you know, you're limited to the capacity of the.
I don't have too many pivots that has all the same soil type all the way around.
No, and that's the thing, that there's so much variability in soil across a section, you know, in textures. It's a lot more uniform up here in these Pullmans, but down in our area, you go from a loam to a clay loam to a fine sandy loam all in the same field. And infiltration and water holding capacity changes across all of those textures.
So we're staying on a 7-day cycle. And some people would ask, would a 5-day cycle at an inch be better? Yeah. Because that would be one way to increase your infiltration. If you go every 5 days and put on an inch, which, you know, you, instead of putting all that water on at once, you're spreading it over time. So 5 to 7 days, you know, would be better. Every 2 days at a half inch is not better. Okay. Every 3 days at half an inch is not better. So I kind of lost track. I think we're at 8.14. Okay. So we look at 8.14. We draw a line between 8.13 and 8.14, and we're starting another irrigation cycle. And the first amount of water on 8.14 is 0.16 inches. That's the PET. Someone, if you'd run the numbers, Glenn. And then 0.19 is the next day. You see we got 0.40 inches of rainfall. Okay. I really didn't count that 0.4. You could have, but I didn't count it. Okay. It's just not that much. But I'm gonna show you where I'm gonna count rain somewhere else, okay? Then you come down to .22,
A lot of it does.
and that's on the 16th. Does everybody see the next day is .22? And then the 18th is .22, or 2.23. The next day is .25. Next day is .28. We're getting near peak bloom. So what are those numbers? 155. Okay. We got 1.2 inches of rain, and we'll actually count that rain, you know, the next time around. Okay. So I want you to skip over, and I want the page that starts with 8:31. We're getting toward the end of the season. And if you look at 9/11, we have .19 on 9/11. Goes to .2, .19, .2. We're adding numbers until we get to about an inch of water at 60%. But as you add these things up, we're going to see that we got .41 inches. That was counted against it. We actually counted it at that time of the year. And we took 60% of ET, and it comes up to needing .96. And we were starting to irrigate at a 10-day cycle. Okay, we're off of peak demand. You can see that we're at first open bowl. You can pull that chart back up. And we're starting to get the first open bowl in here. And so the demand is starting to drop off. Okay. And then, so essentially what you do is you run these numbers every day, and once you get to the point where you need to put on about an inch to an inch and a half at 60%, that's when you irrigate. If you got a 1 inch rain, you take the rain off those numbers. So let's say you came up, let's say you're adding up, you go quarter inch, quarter inch, quarter inch, quarter inch, and you got a 1 inch rain. You're back to 0. Figure it. Okay. Then you got a quarter inch, quarter inch, quarter inch, quarter inch. You're at .75. Got another quarter inch.
So basically what you're doing is you're taking your daily ET. If you get a rain, you take your rain time your effective rain rate. So
Yeah.
Right.
if you had an inch of rain, you take 7.5 inches off your ET and just reset it to that point until you get to.
It's just like kind of working a checkbook in a bank. You're running against the balance. And this is not absolutely, you know, there are parameters you got to follow. This is not 100% perfect. But it'll do a couple things. Is number one, it'll make your water predictable. You'll start being able to relate how much water that you have and how effective it is. And you'll know that if you can irrigate it at 60% ET, your yield potential would be anywhere from 2 to 2.7 bales per acre is what you ought to be able to make. Even some years, if you get rain to help you, of course the rain is going to be a factor, it could make a little bit more. But when you start taking that same amount of irrigation and you just start putting it on willy-nilly, you know, that's when your yields start dropping off, so you have a negative correlation to your water. What the following the tracking the ET up and down this curve, what it does is it's delivering water at the time when the crop is most needing it. If you can fill this profile in here, you have a bank of water that you're pulling through, or trying to draw from when you get into these higher demand rates that you know that you can't supply. So it's nothing really more than a strategy. I don't have a big farm, I'm not a big farmer, but I have 140 acres, and this is the way we water at 60% of ET. And we made like right at 3 bales. We didn't make 4, but we didn't put 30 inches of water on it either. You know. And so anyway, you know, we talked a little bit about realistic yield goals. In this area, you know, 60 to 70, 75% ET, if I had pumping capacity to irrigate at, if I had 1,200 gallons a minute water, I'd be irrigating at 70, 75% of ET, because we don't have the growing season to grow cotton at 120% ET in most years. It is, we just don't have that latitude. If you were in Arizona, you would, but we don't here. And so you run the risk of pushing that cotton too hard and getting big cotton with a lot of immature bolls at the end and freezing it and have low micronair, have grade problems. And I know people that push cotton pretty hard with a lot of water, and some years they make 5 bales worth of bolls, but they only make 2 bales worth of lint. And so, anyway, that's the way it works. Everybody kind of followed. We kind of went pretty quick. Did everybody follow that strategy?
How deep do you try to fill the profile to start?
3 foot.
3 foot?
Yeah, and realistically, you're probably only filling it around 24 inches. Yeah.
You said you put on broadcast to start with, and
Yeah.
then you drop back to the leaf.
As dry as it is this year, if you try to put your first irrigation on, let's say people are gonna start irrigating to plant cotton in May, they're gonna start irrigating pretty quick, okay? So I figure I've got about 4 or 5 weeks to get my pre-water on. And when I say pre-water, I wanna fill the soil to about 18 inches now. Prior to planting, I want about 18 inches worth of moisture to make it, to be available, planting moisture at planting time, okay? So I figure that I'm gonna have to put on one application. My first application is gonna have to be broadcast, okay? If you try to water dry soil, if we had a rain, it wouldn't have to be. But with the way the soil is now, if you're bedded up and you're not no-till or strip-till, and you're bedded up and you try to irrigate with LIPA, you're gonna push that water through those rows, okay? And you're gonna have it running everywhere, you're gonna break your rows over. So your first irrigation has gotta be broadcast, and it's probably gonna take at least 1 inch to 1.25 inches, something like that, to seal that off in order to be able to accept those LIPA irrigations, the subsequent LIPA irrigation. So you'd put on your first broadcast spray, and that's about, that and incorporating herbicides is about the only time I believe in being broadcast spray. But, so you're going to seal that soil. The first one's going to be 1.25 inches, something like that. Second one, you're going to come around with LIPA and put about 1.5 inches, and then you're going to have to make a decision. Do I need a third one based on feeling in the soil? You may need to come in and put another inch prior to planting. But the key is to try to get it as close to planting as you can, where you've got about 18 inches. The reason why you need at least 18 inches, 18 to 20 inches is just the evaporation rates, and the wind will take it out. You know, if you're on strip till, you're probably not going to take as much. If you're in no-till, it's probably not going to take as much. It looks to me like a strip till or a no-till situation in most years is about a 3 or 4 inch advantage over cultivation, and especially in the spring.
You said only time you like to spray is at the beginning in this condition, and then fumigation. What about germination? I mean,
Yeah, germination, you're going to have to put it in a spray probably. It's just when we started, we said this thing's just you got to go with logic. You just got to say, well, this is not going to apply. You need to be out there sticking your finger in the soil. You know, the root systems have got to be in moisture, and if you're in LIPA and you got a little seedling with a root that big, you're not going to probably push that water out there until you get a big enough root system where those roots start growing into the furrow. But the other advantage to this alternate furrow irrigation is you're always keeping one furrow dry, and that furrow is, I don't think it's correct to say accumulating heat, but the crop matures quicker than if you're cooling off the soil profile. I think Dr. Krieg do a whole lot better job of explaining that than I can.
Well, the other advantage, and I'm a firm believer in furrow diking. We really on LIPA dike my water rows, but that dry middle, of course, it's used to get through with tractor traffic, so you're not bouncing. But I'm tempted to look at, especially where you've got better than 4 gallons per minute per acre, 5 gallons or so going to every row drops, and watering every row, so that you're not putting on any more water than you had, but you're putting it down. If you can put an inch on with that, or an inch and a half, you're not gonna have to run down the middles.
Are you gonna dike every middle then?
No, I'm still gonna leave the wheel tracks.
Some people have asked, do I have to have it bedded up to leave them? And Glenn's not bedded.
No.
You don't have to have it bedded up. Glen farmed strip till, and you can't see. It's not weighted. He even grows broadcast milo, and you can't tell where the water's going and where it's not. He does. I think a lot of that has to do with filling that profile. Where you fill that profile early and you've got enough moisture, and then he comes back in and he pushes that water. Soil's got to dry to a certain extent to accept water. And so when it dries and you water, it pushes that water back in and moves it. If it gets too dry, of course, you go on the other end of that and things don't work real well. But, the key is once you start following this, you're going to start thinking about counting your rainfall. And that's our biggest benefit for our areas, to be able to count rainfall against your irrigation. And so we had some big rains last year. Took advantage of them and counted them. Using PET or ET tells you how much to count it, because you know how much the crop's using. Has anybody used this technique before, where they use PET? Eddie did. I would urge you to try it. And that's all I have, unless it's
Okay.
anything.